Okay, so it's time to talk about the AdCom hierarchy of needs, a concept that I have borrowed heavily from a famous psychologist called Abraham Maslow. You might have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you haven't, here's the quick overview. The idea is that as we progress as human beings, we need certain core needs to be met before we can advance to that next level. So in a nutshell, it's really difficult to achieve that highest level of enlightenment and inner peace and self-actualization if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from or if you don't have a roof over your head. Similarly, it's kind of hard to worry about having a roof over your head if there's no oxygen in your body or if you're dying. So that's a complete ruinous and oversimplification of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you were a psychology major, please do not send me an angry email correcting me. The point is that admissions committees also have similar hierarchy of needs. That is, you need to prove certain things to them before you can advance to the next level of consideration. Now, I built the lab report in the strengths and weaknesses section around the framework of the AdCom hierarchy of needs. The idea being that if you have any weaknesses in your profile that might appear at first glance, you need to be aware of them so that you can think about whether or not it's worth your time to bolster those facets of your profile first. As a quick reminder, the lab report is not a prognosis, it is a prescription for places you might want to focus. Now, all of these different needs that the AdComs have make a lot more sense if you keep in mind that business schools at their core are in fact a business. And what they live and die on is their brand. After all, it's not like you need to get an MBA to practice business. It's not like there's a licensing exam at the end of your 2 years that, 87% of our people passed the licensing exam on their first try. So since there's really no quantitative way to evaluate business schools, the number one thing they need, and they know this, is they need a strong brand. And at its core, the brand of a business school is built by the students it lets in, both in the short term, because they want people to come into their program who are going to get a lot out of it, who are going to have a great time, who are going to finish their 2 years or their 1 year and say, yes, this was fantastic, I'm so glad I did this. Number one, so they want to make sure that you're going to have a good time, to put it bluntly. And number two, they want alumni that are then going to go out into the world and people are going to say, wow, did you see, man, that girl in Corp Dev, she's really good. Yeah, where'd she go to school again? Berkeley? Oh yeah, huh. And that's how people start developing like really good impressions of schools. And that sort of word of mouth is what starts to build a school's brand. So they're looking for people who will, at the very minimum, be considered good team players and valuable assets to any company or organization, and they're all secretly hoping that each one of you is going to become the next Sheryl Sandberg and be on the cover of Fortune or what have you. So now that we realize that business schools live and die by their brand, and that the brand lives and dies based upon the students that are admitted to the program, let's go back to this hierarchy of needs that I outlined in the lab report. Number one is academics, primarily quant ability, because business school is about business, and almost all of business school classes have some element of quant in them. Even marketing has become highly analytical. Even human resources and management classes, compensation plays a big role in some of these classes sometimes, and so you'd have to be able to, do certain analyses. So if you go to business school, be aware that you're signing up for at least 1 to 2 semesters of some pretty intense math. So they want to be sure when they first look at your application, they want that reassurance. Before you can move on to the next step, they need at a basic level reassurance that you are going to thrive in their academic environment. In some ways, I know this might sound mean, but in some ways a school might be doing a candidate a favor if that candidate is clearly just going to struggle and be miserable and spend 4 hours a night on a problem set that takes everyone else 20 minutes. Like, they're actually doing that candidate a favor if they keep them out at the beginning. I mean, business school is only 1 to 2 years, but it can be a pretty miserable 1 to 2 years if it's not a good fit. So the first thing you have to do before you can pass go is you have to prove to them, hey, I can handle the academics in your program. The second thing they're interested in is your basic emotional maturity, your EQ, your ability to have compassion. In a nutshell, they want to make sure that you're not evil and that wherever you go in the future, that you are at least likable on some level. This is very important to them in many time periods. Number one, in the short term, they want you to get along with your classmates. They want you to be a positive force for your other classmates. Again, so that your classmates say like, oh yeah, everyone at HBS was so nice. Number two, they want to make sure that when you get out into the world, again, that people don't say like, oh, those people from that school, oh, they're all so cutthroat, I can't stand them, right? That damages the brand. And on a very extreme level, they want to make sure that you're not going to end up going to jail. So EQ is kind of a broad term, but at its base level, they want to make sure that you're a good person, that you're at a certain level of maturity, that you demonstrate a certain level of compassion, and yeah, that you're not going to like freak out and like throw some teammate under the bus later on and, you know, or lie to a customer or that sort of thing. So that's the next thing they're looking for. You could be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't demonstrate that EQ, you're not getting to that next level of consideration. This is why sometimes if you go on message boards, which for the most part, I advise people to not go on message boards because message boards are full of inaccuracies and speculation and all kinds of craziness going on. But sometimes if you do go on a message board, you might see someone post something like, oh, I don't believe it. I have a 3.9 GPA and I have a 780 on the GMAT and I still got rejected. This is absurd. Well, and if you ever see someone like that, you can think to yourself, they must have failed. They clearly passed the academic level, that academic test, but they must have failed the EQ test or some other test higher up on the pyramid. The third thing after EQ is post-MBA employability. Now, I know this might seem like a really, I've just been talking about this some other lofty principles like maturity and benevolence, but they also want to make sure that when you graduate, you will be employable. A lot of the reason why pretty much everyone gets an MBA is that they want to, in some way, either get a better job or do better at their current job. No matter what field you want to work in, you're probably going to get an MBA to advance your professional standing in some way or another. So when they look at your profile, if you don't have a very traditional profile, or if you have a profile that, that doesn't match, I talk about this a lot actually in the career vision section, which is the next module. If you work in something that's way over here and your career vision is like way over here, are you going to be able to get that job? That's something that they worry about, right? Because the employment statistics play a big role in the rankings, right? So percentage of graduates who are employed 6 months after graduation, like they are very aware of those rankings, again, because brand is super important to them. And so since the employment statistics are a big part of those rankings, and since rankings is a big part of a school's brand, they want to make sure that you are going to at least have some sort of employment potential, and also ideally that you get the job that you are going to business school to get. So that way, again, you are a happy customer at the end and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did this, as opposed to saying, I really didn't need to do this. Finally, the final pinnacle of the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs is the very vaguely worded and often thrown about phrase of leadership potential. Now, with the MyLab report with leadership potential, as with any of the other categories, again, I'm not saying if you got like a red or an orange or a not so good result here, I'm not saying that you don't have leadership potential. Similarly, you might have gotten a green or a blue on your lab report, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a ton of leadership potential. What I was trying to get across there is that certain backgrounds tend to lend themselves better to leadership opportunities than others. For example, people who work in a small startup company, since it is a small company, they usually have more of an opportunity to roll up their sleeves and jump in and make things happen, as opposed to someone perhaps working in a technical role at a very large company. So, the whole rest of the applicant lab is primarily focused on proving that you have leadership potential, thinking about which examples you're going to use to prove this, thinking about where you're going to use those examples. Are you going to use that example in an essay? Are you going to have a recommender talk about it? Are you going to put it on your resume? So since the leadership is the top of the pyramid, it is the most important piece to express, and so that's what the whole rest of the lab is for. But please realize that you need to have those first few things. If you are if you're not smart enough to handle the academics, or if you're really smart but you're kind of a jerk and people don't really say nice things about you, guess what? They're not going to be interested. Or if you're really nice and you're kind of smart, but oof, you kind of seem a little flaky and you haven't been able to hold down a job before, and so they're a little worried about you not being able to get a job or hold down a job in the future, you know. And then again, it keeps moving up. Okay, if you've got a strong employment history, then you're sort of at this next level of consideration, and that's what separates the leadership potential is what separates the qualified candidates from the people who are accepted. So I hope that this discussion of the hierarchy of needs has been useful. If you have any questions about it, please send me an email, hello@ApplicantLab.com, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks.